people can project things about themselves that they like about themselves, but like are nervous to put out there. Like maybe someone's told you you're too much, too loud, too wild, too colorful, too whatever it is, right? And so then maybe you're like, well, then that's a negative thing. I don't want to be too much, but there's nothing wrong with that. People might just be scared to be too much. Welcome back to the Butterfly Season podcast. You guys, I just want to say thank you so much. I feel like we're like best friends now. The amount of people that have reached out to me on Instagram and in my DMs about the podcast, that they're listening or that it's been helpful for them, that I truly, truly, truly appreciate. It not only helps me curate what you guys kind of want to hear, but it also helps me navigate on this journey, what is the best way to share? Who should I bring in? And what should I keep talking more about? So please continue to post online if you're listening. Tag me if you're listening with a guest. Tag them. Let them know like what your favorite takeaway was. That literally means the absolute world. So I just want to say thank you so much for that. And for that, I'm going to jump right in. Today, I want to talk to you guys about corners, and I know that that sounds a little bit abstract, and it kind of is, but if you've been listening to this podcast, you know that I am an Enneagram 3, I've struggled with codependency, and I'm kind of navigating that. We're kind of navigating that together, and what I'm really working on right now is not tying myself to accolades and my self-worth to achievements or work or all of these outside factors that make up this perception of who I want people to think I am. So I'm working on that. But what comes with that is a self-evaluation on my end, on other people's projections. And so for somebody who struggles with tying their value into outside things, codependency is like an outside world type of thing. Like we're not really intrinsically in here and operating in here. We're operating on and giving our control to what other people think of us. And so what comes with that also is a level of evaluating projections and other people's projections on me and figuring out if I am absorbing those to be true for me because of people pleasing and at the core of it all, like wanting to be seen, heard, loved, and validated, or if it's really my thing to take on. And so that's kind of been like this whole mind game, if you will, on my journey of like self-exploration. And so I do want to talk about projection and corners, and I swear I will land this plane and the idea of corners will all make sense. But basically, as it comes to, for people who are listening and maybe are unfamiliar with projection, I think some of these words that you've heard on the podcast as of late or even up to this point, a lot of them are buzzer words, but there's just so much more meaning behind them. I was talking about that on the podcast with the therapist Bianca Grace on the episode before this one on codependency and how like narcissism is a buzzer word. Codependency is a buzzer word, but like at the core of it, not a lot of us know what they really mean. And I feel like the same is true with projection. You'll often hear people, because I'm guilty of it too, you'll hear people say like, oh, they're projecting on me, or like that's I guess a great defense mechanism or comeback, if you will, on, someone saying something that how they feel about you or saying something about you and you saying, well, that's not really me, that's you projecting on me. It's not a valid or unbiased or thought about that person. Anyways, so for those of you listening that maybe don't know what projection is like dumping clutter into someone else's living room. Like you just have a bunch of stuff, you just dump it, and then you're like, wow, you're really messy, but like it's all of your mess. So that's the best way, especially with like emotional clutter and all the things. Like think about it in that way. That is what I would say projection is. Now, as it relates to projection and corners, I had this like really beautiful experience where in like a meditative state where my subconscious was just like talking to me very loudly and was like, you take on people's stories as your own, but they're just corners. And as I explored that deeper, I'm like, corners, like what do you mean they're just corners? And then when you think about corners, like a corner is where two things meet, right? A corner, like a corner of a room. Not a lot be can be put in a corner, right? You think about like putting a baby in a corner or a child in a corner when they're in trouble. Like if you're looking in a corner, like all you can see is literally everything in that little corner, and that can be your whole world, that small little crevice. But all it takes is a perspective shift, so you can turn around and look at all of what else is in the room, to see literally what else is in the room. And so I sat with that. I talked with my therapist about that. And I was like, wow, like my subconscious is so kind to tell me that like some of this stuff isn't yours to keep or take on. It's not even about you. It's other people's projections that you may feel like, well, is this about me? Is this something I should explore? Am I struggling with this? And that perspective shift for me was like, okay, well, if I want to explore those deeper levels of myself, I have the opportunity to. I don't have to sit in this corner and accept everything as true, right? Because on the one end, we talked about the level of projection and that being a comeback for somebody. But it could also be a level of deflection on your end, right? So let's just say if somebody maybe isn't projecting and calls out something within you and you're like, yeah, you're just projecting. Like that can be an excuse to not kind of do the work. But what I love about this corner analogy is that you can choose to sit in the corner and look in the corner and be in that corner and accept whatever it is that's true. Or you can say, hey, let me turn around, shift my perspective and decide, is this true about me? Should I explore this a little bit deeper? Or is this not true about me? And is it truly just a projection? And so, yeah, that's kind of what I've been working on. And I wanted to share that with you as I'm kind of going through it. We can kind of go through it together. I do want to give you some examples, though, of like, what is that in real life? Because we're kind of talking in the abstract, and these are going to be, these are like literally real world examples. So the first one is I noticed that I have a lot of projections from like my childhood, specifically from my mom, things that I've taken on as my own and have thought to this point that they were mine, but they're really not. So one of them was in high school, I ran track, I cheered, I did volleyball, I did basketball, all of the things. Like I was just very heavily involved with everything, which performer, right? Like this all makes sense. And I remember doing track my freshman year and having a conversation with my mom, and she was like, wow, yeah, like, you know what? I did track, but I never ran because I was so scared of like when they would shoot the gun and you had to run. So really like for track practice, I would just hide, especially when the races would come. They'd call my name on the loudspeaker and I would just hide because I never wanted to run. And so I had this story that I never wanted to run because I didn't like to run. And really, I kind of adopted that projection of my mom's own fear, right? And said, well, I just don't like the faces that people make when they run. I think it's kind of funny and it's embarrassing for me if I have to run and people are like looking like, you know, when like the sprinters are sprinting, like their faces are like crazy because we're just, you know, exuding so much energy and running so fast. But I was embarrassed of that. And so therefore I didn't want to run. But there's a world where I may have not been scared to run if I didn't absorb that story and take it on as my own. Another one too, my mom would always say, like, I'm always nervous to hold babies. I don't like to hold babies. And I feel the same way. I'm like, yeah, I don't really want to hold a baby. Like, I've had so many awkward situations with friends and family members who have had babies, and just like, that's a beautiful time. Some people, like, when they're just handing you their newborn, people are like, oh my God, give me, I want to carry. I've always been like, ooh, no. Or like, you know, and luckily my husband has been there for most of those times, and he knows that about me and has been like, oh, I'll carry it, right? So it's kind of funny to see these projections. Some of them, like, you take them on as your own, even though it's not your own story, but it was a learned behavior from when you were younger that you've seen emulated. But another one could even be absorbing people's energy and taking it on as your own. I am a huge absorber of energy, good energy and bad energy, and I'm starting to build boundaries around not absorbing bad energy. But I do remember specifically a time in law school before I was even like awake to some of this like self-development stuff and just having more self-awareness around emotional intelligence, emotional regulation. And I had this classmate. He was a male, a little bit shorter than me, and he was very funny, like so funny, but also like very negative, like always found the negative in whatever the thing was, and always like had something to say about people and all of the things. And I would realize, it wasn't until the end of the year that I realized, like every time I leave his presence, I literally, like, my body starts to like hunch over. I'm like more negative. I'm seeing a lot of negative things. I'm seeing the negative things that I didn't once see, but that he's explained to me now. And I'm looking for negative things in situations. And also, like, to be fair, law school is a very high stress environment. People kind of are a little bit crazy and sleep deprived, proteins deprived, running on caffeine. Like, all of that is true. But what I realized was, like, when I'm around him, I absorb his energy, I take it on as my own, and then I begin to live out in the world like that. And these are small and somewhat funny examples, but in all actuality, I want you guys to take inventory just like I am. Like, what areas of your life have you taken on as your own that might not even be your own? Positive or negative, right? Like, can you imagine something even more serious? Like, hey, I'm actually, I don't know, unmotivated or negative. I think I heard a friend saying, like, I don't set New Year's resolutions because I just think that, everyone sets them and no one follows through. And I'm like, is that you absorbing other people's stuff and taking that on as your own? Just because everyone else doesn't follow through on their New Year resolutions doesn't mean that you won't, right? But like, we all subconsciously do this in so many ways. And if we can build a sensitivity to that, we can kind of course correct some of the behaviors that we otherwise wouldn't have had. And so some questions that you might ask yourself are like, what projections have I tried on and kept? And it could be from your parents, your partner, your friends. Like, what is something that, or another question is, what is something that someone has said about you that's stuck? Like, what is it? If it's stuck with you, is it yours? Can you shift your perspective and turn around and say, hey, like, yes, this is mine, or no, it isn't, or yes, because, and actually maybe this is a part of me that I don't like, and I'm going to do the work to like change that. Or it can't be a part of you that you like. People can project things about themselves that they like about themselves, but like are nervous to put out there. Like, maybe someone's told you you're too much, too loud, too wild, too colorful, too whatever it is, right? And so then maybe you're like, well, then that's a negative thing. I don't want to be too much, but there's nothing wrong with that. People might just be scared to be too much or frustrated by it. I remember one time I had a call with a business coach. This was probably like 4 or 5 years ago. And I was having a conversation with her, and I had mentioned, like, and this is when I was in the thick of my agency, working 18-hour days, just like filled to the brim with work, toxic codependent relationship, like just unaligned in so many ways. And if you're just tuning into this episode for the first time, if you go all the way back to the first episode of my podcast talking about, like, my butterfly season, it'll all make sense. But I had a business coach around this time, and in that call, I had said, yeah, like, other people who do the same thing as me, like, they just don't have as much work as I do, or like are operating with their business with as much volume as I do because they're out on the weekends, like I don't have time for that because I'm so busy. Like, they're just not as serious about their job. I'm projecting on them because there's a part of me that I see in them that I wish I had. Maybe that's perceivably boundaries, work-life balance, right? Like, what are some of the things that someone has said about you that's stuck, or that you've said about someone else that you're like, hey, maybe this is about me and not about them? There's times where I can feel like they're not really that motivated, but really, like, I'm in a season of unmotivation right now. And so I'm just literally projecting on them. it is a really hard look, kind of like a shoot you between the eyes look within inside yourself, and it may be uncomfortable, but I'm exploring it. We can do it together. We'll be fine. But just think about that. Ask yourself some of those questions. Another question, if you feel like you might be absorbing the energy of people around you, is if you leave somewhere feeling negatively, you can ask yourself, what was my baseline before I was around, or before I started to feel negative? I remember this was actually happened last month, maybe 2 months ago. I work at a few coffee shops, and one of the ones that I frequent has like a little co-working desk. And some people will work on there, some people will just have coffee together on there. It's not like required to work. And there was a group of women talking about this other woman the whole time, literally going in on her. And I was working, and then I started to feel like, I don't know, just like not high vibe. I started to feel very negative and just like irritated. And then I was like, hold on. What was my baseline before? Like before I started to feel this way? I felt great. I had my coffee. The drive over was great. I was singing in the car. The weather was nice. Like I felt so great leading up. And when I got here is when I started to feel bad or negative. And I was like, okay, well, where is this coming from? And then I realized, well, sitting here with these women, even though I'm working, I'm still hearing everything that's going on. So I got up and left and went to a different coffee shop, right? Like that's me in real time kind of course correcting and choosing to not take that on. But when we're like asleep at the wheel or asleep at our own subconscious thoughts, I could have taken that negative energy with me the entire day. And who knows who I would have ran into or what opportunities would have approached me. But because I'm feeling this way, I'm missing out on God knows what, right? So the question is, what was your baseline before you started to feel this way? And then take inventory of that and figure out, hey, do I need to set a boundary around this? Are these emotions mine? Are they not mine? And if they're not yours, like how can you prevent yourself from getting into this space again? Is it the same people? Is it the same places? So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at, and I'm excited to be doing this with you guys. So if you've asked yourself a few of these questions, or if you found value around this at all on projection and absorbing people's energies, post it online, tag me in it. We're kind of doing this together, and I'm just so happy to have this community of you guys. It's been great. I don't feel alone in this process, and yeah, I'm just excited to continuing on. Anyway, have a great rest of your day, whatever point of the day you're listening to this. And yeah, thanks for listening, guys.